A little bobcat kitten keeps following an officer for help, and when she realizes WHY, she bursts into tears. At first, it looks like a lost animal in the cold, but this is no ordinary rescue. The kitten isn't running from her. It's leading her to something in the shadows of the mountains. She uncovers signs of a hidden cruelty chains, blood, and secrets no one wants exposed. Suddenly, the officer isn't just facing a wild animal's cry for help. She's staring down a deadly truth powerful men would do anything to hide. Why is this fragile creature so desperate to cling to her? And when the truth comes out, will the officer's courage be enough to survive what she's about to face? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger. Something shared the winter sun had already dipped behind Montana's jagged peaks. Leaving Deputy Carolyn Brackett alone with her thoughts and the steady hum of her patrol truck's engine, she guided the vehicle carefully along the icy back, her gray-blue eyes scanning the endless white landscape that stretched out before her. "Just check the south fence line," Sheriff Morton had said earlier, barely looking up from his coffee. Simple enough for the extra hands. The words still stung, even after 3 years on the force. Carolyn gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. She'd graduated top of her class at the academy. But here she remained just the backup. The extra deputy. The truck's headlights cut through the growing darkness, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Caroline checked her watch. 6:15 in the evening. At first, she thought it was just another shadow playing tricks on her. But there it was again, a small, dark figure stumbling through the deep snow behind her truck. Caroline eased off the gas, squinting through the mirror. The figure kept pace. Determined, despite its unsteady gait, she pulled over to the side of the road, keeping the engine running for warmth, and stepped out into the biting cold. "Well, I'll be," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than a house cat, was struggling through the snowdrifts. Its spotted fur was matted and ragged, its normally proud tufted ears drooping with exhaustion, but what struck Caroline most were its eyes, wide, desperate, and fixed on her with an intelligence that made her pause. Every bit of her training screamed at her to keep her distance. Wild animals, especially cats, were unpredictable and dangerous, no matter their size. But this wasn't normal behavior, not by a long shot. Bobcats were solitary, secretive creatures that avoided human contact at all costs. The kitten reached her boot and, to Caroline's astonishment, pressed its small body against her leg. It looked up at her and let out a pitiful mewl that seemed to echo across the empty landscape. "Hey there, little one," Caroline said softly, kneeling down despite herself. "What's got you so worked up?" The kitten moved away from her boot, took a few steps toward the tree line, then turned back to look at her. It mewled again, more urgently this time. Caroline had spent enough time in these mountains to recognize the universal signal of "follow me." She stood slowly, brushing snow from her uniform pants. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The kitten's behavior was too deliberate, too purposeful. The bobcat kitten watched her intently, its small body trembling from cold or fear. She couldn't tell. When Caroline took a step toward it, the kitten's ears perked up, and it moved a few more steps toward the trees, constantly looking back to ensure she was following. Caroline returned to her truck just long enough to grab her flashlight and radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Brackett. I'm investigating a potential situation off County Road 12, about 3 miles south of Miller's Creek." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Deputy. Nature of the situation." Caroline looked at the waiting kitten, knowing how ridiculous she would sound. "I'm following up on some unusual wildlife behavior. We'll report back in 15 minutes. 10-4, Deputy, be careful out there." As she clicked off the radio, Caroline could almost hear the dispatcher's unspoken thoughts. Just the extra deputy, chasing after animals in the dark. But something in her gut told her this was important. The kitten's eyes held too much urgency, too much desperation to ignore. "All right," she said to the bobcat, which had waited patiently during her radio call. "Show me what's so important." The kitten immediately turned and began picking its way through the snow, staying just within the beam of Caroline's flashlight. Its small tracks led away from the road, toward a dense patch of pine trees that marked the beginning of the deeper wilderness. With each step, Caroline felt the weight of her decision. She was probably breaking a dozen protocols right now, following a wild animal into the darkness. But in her 3 years of service, she'd learned to trust her instincts. Kitten needed her help, even if nobody back at the station would believe her. The cold air bit at her face as she followed the kitten's determined path, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like distant beacons in the vast Montana wilderness. Whatever this kitten was trying to show her, Caroline had a feeling her quiet evening patrol was about to become anything but simple. The Bobcat Kitten moved with surprising speed, despite its exhausted state. Her flashlight beam cut through the growing shadows, catching glimpses of the small creature's tail as it darted between snow-laden pines. Every few yards it would pause, looking back with those unnaturally urgent eyes, making sure she followed. After about 10 minutes of hiking uphill, the smell hit her first, acrid and chemical. Like burned plastic mixed with something worse. Caroline's hand instinctively moved to rest on her holstered weapon. The kitten had stopped at the crest of a small rise. Waiting as she reached the top, her flashlight beam revealed the scene below, and her breath caught in her throat. The remains of what had once been a hunting cabin lay scattered across the snowy ground like a broken skeleton, blackened timbers thrust up from the snow at odd angles, and sections of corrugated metal roofing had peeled back like curled paper. The destruction wasn't recent. Snow had already settled into the ruins, but it couldn't have been more than a few days old. "What happened here?" Caroline muttered, sweeping her light across the scene. The kitten darted forward into the wreckage, and she followed cautiously, her boots crunching on a mixture of snow and charred debris. The beam of her flashlight caught something metallic, and she moved closer. Or rehabilitation. These were crude things made of welded metal, too small for their intended occupants. Some had been warped by the fire's heat, but others remained intact, their doors hanging open like hungry mouths. The Bobcat Kitten was scratching frantically at the frozen ground near one of the smaller cages, letting out soft, distressed sounds. Caroline knelt beside it, examining the cage more closely. Dark stains marked the metal bars, and the ground beneath blood. She realized with growing anger, this wasn't just some hunter's cabin that had accidentally burned. This was something much uglier. Her light caught more details that made her jaw clench. She'd seen similar markings before, in briefings about wildlife trafficking operations, but her superiors had always dismissed such concerns as big city problems that didn't touch their jurisdiction. "Dispatch," said into her radio, standing up straight. The kitten had stopped scratching and was now pressing against her leg again, trembling. "Go ahead, deputy," came the crackled response. "I need Sheriff Morton out here. I found what appears to be the remains of an illegal hunting operation." "Brackett, aren't you supposed to be running patrol on County Road 12? "Yes, sir, but I followed some unusual signs, and let me guess, that wildlife behavior you mentioned." "Listen, deputy, we don't have resources to chase after every rabbit. Trail. If you found some old hunter's camp that burned down, document it and move on. I need you back on your regular patrol route." Caroline felt her face flush with frustration. "There's evidence of organized criminal activity based on what? Some cages and a burned-down shack." "Brackett, you're letting your imagination run wild. Document it if you must, but get back to your actual duties." "Clear," she swallowed hard. "Clear, sir." The radio fell silent, and Caroline stood in the growing darkness, her flashlight beam trembling slightly with suppressed anger. The Bobcat Kitten looked up at her, and in its eyes she saw a reflection of her own frustration. The frustration of being dismissed, of having serious concerns brushed aside. "They're wrong," she said quietly, both to herself and the kitten. "This isn't nothing. This isn't just some wild animal trouble. She pulled out her phone and began taking photos, the cages, the bloodstains, the strange markings. Her flashlight caught more details, scattered shell casings, lengths of heavy chain, syringes half buried in the ash and snow. This wasn't the work of local hunters. This was organized, professional, cruel. The kitten suddenly tensed against her leg, its ears swiveling toward the darkness beyond the ruins. Caroline froze, listening intently. For a moment she thought she heard the distant sound of an engine, but it faded into the winter silence. Looking down at the trembling creature beside her, Caroline made a decision. She might be just a deputy, but she wasn't going to let this go. Something deeply wrong had happened here, and if no one else would take it seriously, she would find the truth herself. She knelt down beside the kitten. "You escaped from here, didn't you? That's why you came to find me." The small creature met her gaze with those knowing eyes, and Caroline felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Whatever was going on here, whatever forces were at work in her peaceful mountain community, she had just become involved. Caroline's cruiser rolled slowly past the elaborate wooden gates of Delaney's mountain lodge. The sign boasted letters and gold leaf trim. Everything about it screamed money and privilege. Through the morning mist, she could see the massive log building perched on the hillside, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes. At the security booth, a guard in a crisp uniform straightened up. "Can I help you, Deputy?" "Here to see Mr. Delaney." "Deputy Caroline Brackett?" After a short radio exchange, the gate swung open. As she drove up the winding road, Caroline noticed cameras tracking her progress. Everything here was carefully controlled, monitored. The main lodge's great room took her breath away despite herself. Vaulted ceilings rose 2 stories high, dominated by a massive stone fireplace. Trophy heads lined the walls: elk, moose, mountain, lion, their glass eyes staring down at her, Deputy Brackett. A smooth voice drew her attention. Royce Delaney descended the curved staircase like he was making an entrance on stage. His boots were hand-tooled leather, his ranch wear clearly custom-made. He offered a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold green eyes. "What brings the sheriff's office to my humble establishment?" Caroline kept her voice professional. "I'm investigating a burned-down structure about 8 miles northeast of here. Found some concerning evidence of illegal hunting activities." "Yes, I heard about that unfortunate fire." Delaney gestured for her to follow him into his office. "Probably some locals getting up to no good. These hills attract all sorts of unsavory characters." The office was all leather and polished wood, with more trophies on display. Caroline noticed one empty mounting plate on the wall, recently installed. "You do a lot of guided hunts up here, only the finest premium experiences." Delaney settled behind his massive desk. "My clients expect discretion and exclusivity. They pay very well for it. I'm sure they do." Caroline pulled out her phone, showed him photos of the cages and markings. "You ever seen anything like this in your territory?" Something flickered in Delaney's eyes, anger quickly masked. "Deputy, I run a legitimate business here. My permits are in order, my guides are licensed." "If you're implying something else, ... Just asking questions, Mr. Delaney." Those symbols matched known wildlife trafficking operations. He leaned forward slightly. "Let me give you some friendly advice. Deputy, these mountains can be dangerous for people who don't know their place. Accidents happen. Smart folks know when to leave well enough alone." The threat was subtle, but clear. Caroline met his gaze steadily. "Is that what happened to whoever was using that cabin, Mr. Delaney? An accident?" His smile turned cold. "I wouldn't know. But I do know that an inexperienced deputy making wild accusations about respected business owners, well, that could be career suicide. Sheriff Morton and I go way back. He understands how things work up here." "I'm sure he does." Caroline stood up. "Thanks for your time. Always happy to help law enforcement." Delaney's voice dripped with condescension. "Do be careful on your way out. The roads can be treacherous." Back at the sheriff's office, Caroline wasn't surprised to find Morton waiting for her. His face was thunderous. "What the hell were you thinking, harassing Royce Delaney?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea how much his operation brings to this county, sir? The evidence? Evidence?" Morton slammed his hand on his desk. "You've got some burned garbage and a wild animal acting strange. Meanwhile, Delaney employs half the town during hunting season. His clients drop more money here in a week than most folks see in a year. So we ignore illegal activity because he's rich. Watch yourself, Brackett." Morton's voice went dangerously quiet. "You're off this case. In fact, you're on desk duty until you learn some judgment. Give me your service weapon." Caroline stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, that's an order, deputy, gun and badge. Now." With stiff fingers, Caroline unholstered her weapon and unpinned her badge. As she placed them on Morton's desk, she saw the framed photo behind him, Morton and Delaney on a hunting trip, both grinning over a trophy kill. Everything clicked into place. The dismissed reports over the years, the blind eye, too suspicious. Activity, the wealthy clients who seemed to ignore hunting seasons and bag limits. Desk duty starts now, Morton growled. One more misstep, and you'll be looking for work in another county. Clear, crystal clear, sir. Carolyn walked out, head high, despite the stares from her fellow deputies. In the parking lot, she found the Bobcat Kitten waiting by her truck. Looked up at her with those knowing eyes, and she felt her resolve harden. They could take her gun, her badge, her authority, but they couldn't take away her determination to uncover the truth. "Don't worry, little one," she said softly, crouching down. "We're not giving up, not by a long shot." The kitten pressed against her leg, a warm reminder of why she'd started down this path. Somewhere in these mountains, terrible things were happening, and with or without a badge, Caroline Brackett was going to bring them to light. Caroline traced her fingers over the fresh paw prints in the snow. The mother bobcat's tracks were distinctive. One paw dragged slightly, suggesting injury. Her heart quickened as she followed the trail deeper into the shadowy hills, the kitten trotting ahead like a tiny guide. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she murmured to the small creature. "You were trying to lead me to her." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines as they climbed higher. Caroline had changed into civilian clothes after her confrontation with Morton, but she still carried her personal hunting knife and flashlight. The kitten stopped suddenly, ears twitching. A faint sound echoed from ahead, a pained animal cry that made Caroline's skin prickle, following a narrow game trail. They came to a rocky outcropping. The kitten darted toward a dark opening, partially hidden by brush. Caroline pulled out her flashlight and carefully approached. The cave entrance was larger than it first appeared, with clear signs of human activity, boot prints in the mud, cigarette butts, even a piece of heavy chain bolted into the rock wall. "Hello," she called softly, sweeping her light across the cave floor. The beam caught a pair of gleaming eyes, and a weak growl rumbled from the shadows. There, chained to the wall, lay a full-grown female bobcat. Her beautiful coat was matted, with blood and dirt, one leg clearly injured. When she saw the kitten, she made a sound somewhere between a growl and a purr. The little one rushed to her side, nuzzling her face. "Oh God," Caroline whispered, taking in the horrible scene. The cave was clearly being used as a holding pen. There were more chains, empty food containers, and what looked like tranquilizer darts scattered about. The mother bobcat watched her warily but didn't show aggression, as if too exhausted to fight. Carolyn knew she couldn't free the animal alone. She needed help. And more importantly, she needed evidence. She took photos with her phone and noted the GPS coordinates. But who could she trust? The sheriff was in Delaney's pocket, and most local authorities would likely be the same. Then she remembered a name that had come up in her research. Jake Harwood, former game warden. He'd tried to expose illegal hunting activities years ago, but had been forced into early retirement after clashing with Delaney. If anyone would understand what she was facing, it would be him. Finding Harwood's cabin wasn't easy. The retired warden lived far off the main roads, and Carolyn had to ask several locals before getting proper directions. When she finally pulled up to the weathered structure, she wasn't sure what to expect. The door opened before she could knock. Jake Harwood stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, despite his years, gray beard neatly trimmed. His eyes were sharp, but weary as he looked her over. "Deputy Brackett," he said gruffly. "Heard you were asking about me in town?" "Town? Not deputy anymore. Not today, anyway." Caroline gestured to her civilian clothes. "I need your help, Mr. Harwood." He snorted. "Last time I helped anyone, it cost me my career. Not interested." He started to close the door, but Caroline stepped forward. "It's about Royce Delaney," she said quickly. "I found evidence of his poaching operation." Harwood paused, door half closed. "Let me guess, nobody would listen." "Worse, they shut me down. Took my badge." She reached into her jacket and pulled out the kitten, which had insisted on coming along. "But I found this little one's mother. She's alive, but chained up in a cave, being held for God knows what purpose." The kitten mewed softly, and something in Harwood's face changed. He opened the door wider, studying the small creature. "Found her mother, you say?" Carolyn nodded. "I have photos, coordinates. But I can't free her alone, and I need someone who knows how to handle injured wildlife." Harwood was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving the kitten. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Damn it all. Come inside," over coffee at his kitchen table. Carolyn laid out everything she'd discovered. Harwood listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions that showed his experienced mind at work. When she finished, he got up and went to a locked cabinet, pulling out maps and old files. "Been keeping track of suspicious activities for years," he explained, spreading the materials on the table. "Patterns of missing animals, unusual movements, client lists I managed to copy before they forced me out. Never had enough proof to do anything with it. Until now," Carolyn said firmly. Harwood looked at her thoughtfully, then down at the kitten curled up by his boot. "Do you know what you're risking? Delaney doesn't just break laws, he breaks people who get in his way." "I know, but I can't walk away, not after what I've seen." A ghost of a smile crossed Harwood's weathered face. "No, I suppose you can't." He picked up one of the maps, tracing a route with his finger. "We'll need supplies, medical kit for the mother bobcat, and we'll have to be smart about this. Delaney's men patrol those hills regularly." Caroline felt hope rising in her chest for the first time since confronting Delaney. "When do we start?" "First light tomorrow," Harwood said, already making notes. "That mother cat's waited long enough," the kitten purred, as if in agreement, and Caroline saw determination replace the weariness in Harwood's eyes. Tomorrow, they would begin to set things right. The next evening found Caroline and Jake trudging through knee-deep snow, their breath forming clouds in the frigid mountain air. Jake carried a heavy backpack filled with medical supplies while Caroline clutched a smaller kit close to her chest. The Bobcat Kitten had been left safely at Jake's cabin, though it had protested loudly at being left behind. "Weather's turning," Jake muttered, glancing at the darkening sky. "Storms coming in faster than expected." Caroline nodded, pulling her coat tighter. "How much further?" "About half a mile. We need to move quiet now. Delaney's men sometimes patrol these trails." They continued in silence, careful to stay in the shadows of the towering pines. The wind picked up, bringing with it the first flakes of what promised to be a serious storm. Caroline's fingers were numb despite her thick gloves, but she pressed on, thinking of the injured mother cat waiting in that dark cave. When they reached the cave entrance, Jake held up his hand, signaling for a stop. He scanned the area carefully before motioning Caroline forward. "No fresh tracks," he whispered, "but stay alert." Inside, the cave was pitch black. Caroline switched on her headlamp, keeping the beam low. The mother bobcat was exactly where she'd left her, chained to a metal stake driven deep into the rock. The animal's eyes glowed in the light, but she remained eerily still. Jake cursed softly when he saw the cat's condition. Dehydrated, probably hasn't eaten in days. He pulled out bolt cutters from his pack. "Keep watch while I work on these chains." Caroline positioned herself near the entrance, straining to hear anything over the howling wind. Jake worked quickly, the sound of metal grinding. Against metal, setting her teeth on edge, the chain snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the cave. That's when Caroline heard it, voices carrying on the wind. "Jake!" she hissed. "Someone's coming!" But it was too late. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and rough voices filled the cave. Well, look what we found." 3 of Delaney's men blocked the entrance, rifles raised. Caroline recognized the leader, Tom Reeves, Delaney's head of security. His cruel smile gleamed in the darkness. The disgraced game warden and the nosy Deputy Reeves sneered. "Boss said you might try something stupid like this." Jake slowly straightened, positioning himself between Caroline and the gunman. "This ends now, Reeves. We've got evidence of everything." "Evidence," Reeves laughed. "You've got nothing but trespassing charges against yourselves, and that's if you make it off this mountain." The freed mother bobcat suddenly sprang to life. Launching herself at the nearest man with a terrifying screech, in the chaos that followed, Caroline acted on instinct. She grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward the cave wall, where she'd noticed a narrow crevice earlier. Gunshots rang out, echoing deafeningly in the confined space. Caroline felt something hot graze her arm as she squeezed through the gap, pulling Jake after her. The crevice opened into a smaller chamber with a low tunnel leading up and away from the main cave. "Move!" Jake shouted, pushing her forward as more shots peppered the rock behind them. They scrambled through the tunnel, scraping knees and elbows on sharp stone. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them. But the passage was too narrow for their larger pursuers to follow quickly. After what felt like hours of desperate climbing, they emerged onto the mountainside in the middle of the growing storm. The wind nearly knocked Caroline off her feet as they plunged into the whiteout conditions. "We can't go back to the truck," Jake shouted over the wind. "They'll be watching it." Caroline nodded, fighting to stay upright in the deepening snow. Her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, and she could see blood staining Jake's sleeve as well. They struggled through the storm for another hour before Jake pulled her toward a rocky overhang. Beneath it, they found partial shelter. From the wind and enough space to huddle together for warmth. "You're bleeding," Caroline said, examining Jake's arm in the dim light of her emergency flashlight. "Just a scratch." Jake's voice was bitter. "Should have known better than to think we could stop them. Delaney always wins." "Tell me," Caroline said softly, pressing a bandage to his wound. "What really happened between you and him?" Jake was quiet. For a long moment, watching the snow swirl past their shelter. "5 years ago, I caught one of his hunting parties with illegal trophies, protected species, out-of-season kills. Had enough evidence to shut him down." He laughed harshly. "Next thing I know, I'm being investigated for taking bribes. Fabricated evidence, fake witnesses, all pointing to me being the corrupt one. Delaney didn't just take my job. He took my reputation, my life's work." Caroline touched his arm gently. "We're not done yet. That mother cat got away in the chaos. She's proof of what they're doing." "If she survives the storm," Jake said wearily, "and if we survive the night, Reeves and his men will be searching as soon as visibility improves." They huddled closer as the temperature dropped, sharing what little warmth they could generate. The storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, both hunters and hunted fought for survival in the unforgiving. Mountain Night Dot. The wind howled outside their rocky shelter as Caroline finished wrapping Jake's arm with strips torn from her thermal undershirt. Her own graze wound stung, but the bleeding had mostly stopped. The small emergency flashlight cast strange shadows on the cave walls, making the space feel even more confining. "We can't just sit here waiting to freeze or get caught," Caroline said, rubbing her hands together to keep warm. "There has to be something we can use against Delaney." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the dim light. "Maybe there is," he said finally. He reached into his pack with his good arm and pulled out a worn leather notebook. "I never stopped watching them, even after they took my badge." Caroline leaned closer as Jake opened the notebook. Inside were detailed hand-drawn maps, dates, coordinates, and notes written in careful handwriting. "What is all this?" "5 years of surveillance," Jake explained, his voice growing stronger. "Every route they use, every supply cache, every holding pen, like that cave back there. I marked their seasonal patterns, delivery schedules, even which officials they've bought off." He flipped through more pages filled with diagrams and observations. "Didn't know what I'd ever do with it, but I couldn't stop collecting the information." Caroline's eyes widened as she studied the maps. "These routes, they all connect to that luxury lodge of his, don't they? Like a web spreading out through the mountains. "Exactly," Jake nodded. "Delaney's smart. He keeps the illegal operation separate from his legitimate business. The lodge is just for show, but these back trails and caves are where the real money comes from. Exotic animals, out-of-season hunting, endangered trophies, all for his wealthy clients who want to shoot something rare." A crackling sound from Caroline's radio made them both jump. Through bursts of static, they could hear Delaney's men coordinating their search. The storm was starting to ease. "They're spreading out," Caroline said grimly, "using the weather as cover to lock down the whole area." She studied the nearest map page, "But with these, we might actually have a chance. Look, there's a pattern." To how they move through these valleys, Jake's expression hardened as he heard more radio chatter. "Delaney's not just hunting us now. He's using this chance to gather up any evidence we might have found. That means moving his captive animals, destroying records, and silencing anyone who might talk," Caroline finished. She thought of the wounded mother bobcat, hoping the creature had found shelter from the storm. "We have to stop him before he can hide everything." Jake traced a route on one of his maps with a calloused finger. "There's an old fire watch cabin. Here, about 3 miles north. I've seen his men use it as a staging area. If they're moving animals, they'll have to pass through their... Caroline nodded, her determination growing stronger. That's where we start then, but we'll need help. She pulled out her phone, checking for signal. Still nothing in the storm. Who would even believe us? Jake asked bitterly. Delaney owns half the county officials. Not all of them, Carolyn said. I know a state wildlife officer who's been trying to build a case against Delaney for months. If we can get to a landline, contact her with what we know. More voices crackled over. The radio, Delaney himself was speaking now, his smooth tone carrying an edge of rage. I want them found. Use whatever force necessary. No one threatens what I've built here. Jake's face grew grim as he listened. He's scared. That's when he's most dangerous. He started gathering his maps, sliding them carefully back into his pack. We need to move. Soon, the storm's breaking, and they'll be checking every shelter they can find. Caroline checked her weapon and remaining ammunition. How well do you still know these trails? Like the back of my hand, Jake replied, some of his old confidence returning. Even in the dark. Those maps are mostly backup. It's all up here. He tapped his temple. 5 years of watching and waiting. Never thought I'd get a chance to actually use it all. They could hear the wind dying down outside, the worst of the storm passing over. Soon the hunters would have clear visibility and the advantage of numbers and equipment. But Caroline felt a fierce hope growing. With Jake's knowledge and her badge, even if her own department wouldn't help, they had a real chance to expose everything. She thought of the desperate Bobcat Kitten that had started all this, how it had refused to give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. We'll need to be careful, she said, checking the cave entrance. Smart. Use your maps to stay. One step ahead of them while we gather proof. Jake nodded, shouldering his pack. Delaney thinks he owns these mountains. Time to show him he's wrong. He gave Caroline a questioning look. You sure you want to risk everything on this? Your career? Maybe your life? Caroline thought of all the times she'd been dismissed, told to look the other way, treated as just. An extra pair of hands. She thought of the wounded animals, the corruption, the arrogance of men like Delaney, who believed money could buy anything. I'm sure, she said firmly. Someone has to stand up to him. Might as well be us. They gathered their remaining supplies, preparing to venture out into the cold night. The storm had left deep snow that would make travel difficult, but would also cover their tracks. Above them, the clouds were breaking up, revealing stars that could help guide their way. Caroline's fingers trembled as she held documents up to the weak beam of her flashlight. She and Jake had managed to reach the firewatch cabin, timing their approach perfectly between patrol sweeps by Delaney's men. What they found inside made her blood run cold. These aren't just hunting records, she whispered, spreading papers across the cabin's dusty table. Look at these numbers. These bank transfers, they're in the millions. Jake leaned in, his weathered face illuminated by the flashlight. That's way more money than any hunting operation could generate, even an illegal one. Caroline nodded, sorting through more papers with growing dread. Wire transfers from shell companies in Mexico, Panama, Colombia, ... She pulled out her small notebook, jotting down details. These aren't just random companies either. I recognize some of these names from bulletins, drug cartels, Jake said grimly, using Delaney's operation to clean their money. The pieces were falling into place. Carolyn found a ledger filled with careful annotations, each entry disguised as legitimate hunting expedition fees. That's why he has so much influence with local officials. He's not just bribing them with hunting money, he's got cartel backing. She thought of all the times she'd been told to back off, how quickly her concerns had been dismissed. It wasn't just about protecting a wealthy local businessman, the corruption went far deeper. Look at this, Jake said, holding up another document. Shipping manifests. They're using the same routes for everything, moving animals, drugs, money. He traced a line on one of his maps. The remote hunting camps, the cave systems, the private airstrip at his lodge, ... It's all connected. Caroline felt her heart pounding. This was bigger than anything she'd imagined when she'd followed that desperate Bobcat Kitten into the snow. She wasn't just dealing with a local poacher anymore. She was up against an international criminal enterprise. We can't take this to the sheriff, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Even if he's not directly involved, Delaney's people would know immediately. We'd be dead before we could get any real help. Jake gathered the most damning documents, carefully storing them in his waterproof pack. So what's our play? We're just two people against an entire cartel operation. Caroline thought hard, remembering her training. We need to document everything, get proof that can't be denied or covered up. She pulled out her phone, taking careful photos of each document before they packed them away, and we need to find a way to contact federal authorities directly, bypass the local corruption entirely. A sound outside made them both freeze. Boots crunching in snow, voices approaching. They quickly gathered the remaining evidence, erasing all signs of their presence. Back exit, Jake whispered, leading the way to a narrow window at the rear of the cabin. They slipped out just as the front door opened, pressing themselves against the cold wooden walls. Check everything, they heard Delaney's distinctive voice order. Those files need to be moved tonight. The winter storm gave us cover, but we can't risk. He was cut off by a burst of radio static. One of his men spoke urgently. Sir, we've got movement on the North Ridge. Could be our targets. Take care of them, Delaney snapped. Permanently. We can't let them expose this operation. There's too much at stake. Caroline and Jake carefully crept away from the cabin, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to stay hidden. Once they were safely away, Caroline stopped to check their position on Jake's maps. We need a new plan, she said firmly. We can't just expose the poaching operation anymore. We need to bring down the entire network. She looked at Jake, her expression determined. But we'll only get one shot at this. If we fail, we won't, Jake interrupted. 5 years I've waited to bring Delaney down. Now we know why he seemed untouchable. He patted his pack, containing the documents. This is what we needed, proof that even his friends in high places can't ignore. Carolyn nodded, her mind racing through options. They needed a way to get their evidence to federal authorities while staying alive long enough for help to arrive. And they needed to ensure the proof couldn't be destroyed or dismiss the weight of what they'd discovered pressed down on her. This wasn't just about saving some wild animals anymore. They'd stumbled onto something that put them squarely in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. But as she heard the distant sounds of Delaney's men searching for them, Caroline felt her resolve harden. She thought of that brave little Bobcat Kitten, fighting against impossible odds. Sometimes the smallest creatures could spark the biggest changes. We need to keep moving, she whispered. Find somewhere safe to plan our next move, she checked. Her weapon, again, knowing they might need it soon. Ready? Jake nodded, his expression grim but determined. Together, they disappeared into the darkness, carrying proof of corruption that could shake the foundations of power in their small corner of Montana. Carolyn spread Jake's weathered maps across a fallen log, her flashlight beam illuminating their planned route into Delaney's lodge. The morning sun hadn't yet broken over the mountain peaks, leaving them in pre-dawn shadows perfect for surveying. The property, his security, is heaviest here and here, Jake whispered, pointing to the main gates and service entrance. But there's a maintenance trail that leads to the back of the property. They rarely guard it because the terrain is so rough. Caroline nodded, watching the Bobcat Kitten pacing anxiously nearby. And you're sure about the layout inside? Worked there 5 years as a guide before things went bad, Jake confirmed. Main office is on the second floor, northwest corner. That's where he'll keep anything incriminating. The basement level has storage rooms they've converted to holding pens. Caroline checked her gear one final time. Rope, bolt cutters, her service weapon, and a small camera to document everything. The kitten is key to this working. Delaney's men will chase any escaped animals to avoid questions from his wealthy clients. Jake scratched his gray beard thoughtfully, using their own greed against them. Smart. He looked at the kitten with concern. But are you sure about putting it at risk? Watch, Carolyn said. She turned to the kitten and made a soft clicking sound they'd practiced. The small creature padded over immediately, alert and ready. It understands more than you'd think, and it wants its mother free. As much as we want Delaney stopped. They moved through the forest with practiced stealth, the kitten following Caroline's silent hand signals. When they reached the maintenance trail, Jake pointed out the security camera's blind spots. Years of observation hadn't been wasted. Carolyn knelt beside the kitten. "Ready, little one?" she whispered. The bobcat's tufted ears twitched in response. She attached a small GPS tracker to its collar, insurance in case things went wrong. The first phase went exactly as planned. The kitten darted across the lodge's expansive back lawn, deliberately visible to the security cameras. Within minutes, shouts of alarm rang out. 2 guards rushed from their posts, calling frantically into their radios about an escaped animal. 3, 2, 1. ... Jake counted down. Right on cue, more guards emerged from the lodge. Even Delaney. Private security couldn't ignore a potential scandal of escaped exotic animals. The kitten led them on a practiced chase, always staying just visible enough to keep their attention. Carolyn and Jake slipped inside through the service entrance, using keys Jake had carefully copied years ago. The basement level was dimly lit and carried the musty smell of too many animals kept in too small spaces. They could hear distressed sounds from behind heavy doors. "You take the office," Jake said, hefting his bolt cutters. "I'll handle the animals." His expression hardened. "Been waiting years to empty these cages." Caroline squeezed his arm. "Be careful. Remember the signal if anything goes wrong. 3 clicks on the radio." She moved swiftly up the back stairs, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The lodge's luxury felt obscene now, knowing it was built on animal suffering and cartel money. Through windows, she could see the guards still chasing the kitten, which was performing its role perfectly. Delaney's office door yielded to her lockpicking skills. Inside, everything reeked of expensive leather and cigars. Caroline went straight for the hidden wall safe Jake had described, her fingers flying over the combination he'd once observed Delaney using. The safe swung open, revealing exactly what they needed: ledgers, shipping manifests, contracts with shell companies, and photographs documenting illegal kills. She photographed everything methodically before stuffing the most damning evidence into her pack. Her radio crackled softly, Jake's voice. Barely a whisper. 6 animals freed so far. Moving them through the back trail now, Caroline allowed. Herself, a small smile. They were actually pulling this off. Years of being underestimated, months of careful planning, all coming together perfectly. She could almost taste the victory. Imagine the look on Delaney's face when his empire crumbled through the office windows. She watched their feline ally still leading the guards on a merry chase, always staying just out of reach. The kitten's determination matched her own small, overlooked creatures, proving their worth. She secured the last of the documents and relocked the safe, leaving everything else exactly as she'd found it. No one would know they'd been here until it was too late. Her radio clicked again, Jake signaling the last of the animals were safely away. Carolyn took one final look around the office, satisfaction warming her chest. They had done it. Had the evidence they needed, and had freed the animals. All that remained was their own escape. She started for the door. Victory within reach, her heart's lighter than it had been in months. Sometimes the smallest actions, like helping a desperate bobcat kitten, could spark the biggest changes. For once, being underestimated had worked in their favor. Caroline's triumph shattered as the office door burst open. Royce Delaney stood there, flanked by 2 burly guards, his expensive boots echoing on the hardwood floor. His cold green eyes held no surprise, only cruel satisfaction. "Deputy Brackett," he said smoothly, "I've been expecting you." He gestured to the evidence-filled pack in her hands. "Though, I must admit, you got further than I anticipated." Caroline's hand moved toward her radio, but one of the guards was faster. The device clattered across the floor, her lifeline to Jake. Severed, she fought hard as they grabbed her, but against 3 men, she stood no chance. "Your retired game warden friend," Delaney continued, straightening his designer jacket. "He's probably hiding in the woods by now. A survivor, that one, but you." He smiled without warmth. "You're going to help me send a message." They dragged her through the lodge's hidden passages, down into a section of caves she hadn't known existed. The air grew thick with the smell of unwashed animals and old blood. In the beam of Delaney's flashlight, she saw the mother bobcat, still chained, but now even more desperate after days without food. Poetic, isn't it? Delaney watched as his men secured Caroline with heavy chains. Next to the wounded animal, the bleeding heart deputy, done in by the very creature she tried to save. The mother bobcat's eyes gleamed in the darkness, muscles tensing with hunger and fear. Carolyn could feel its ragged breathing, sense its desperation. The chain allowed the animal just enough reach to strike at her. "No cameras down here," Delaney said, stepping back. "No evidence. Just another tragic accident, an officer who got too close to dangerous wildlife." He checked his watch. "I give you until morning, at most." The cave entrance sealed behind them, leaving Caroline in near total darkness with the starving bobcat. She pulled against the chains, but they were secured too well. Somewhere above, she heard Jake's distant radio clicks, 3 desperate signals she could no longer answer. The mother bobcat growled, low and hungry. Caroline's darkest hour had arrived, betrayed by those meant to uphold justice, trapped underground, and faced with a death she never imagined. The very animal she'd tried to protect might become her executioner. In the pitch-black cave, Caroline forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting down panic. The mother bobcat's low growls echoed off the stone walls. Her hands trembled as she felt along her belt. Delaney's men had taken her gun, but they'd missed the small survival knife strapped flat against her lower back. The bobcat shifted restlessly, its chain rattling. Caroline remembered the kitten's trusting eyes, how it had led her here. Like mother, like child, neither of them deserved this fate. With painful slowness, she worked the knife free. "Easy now," she whispered to the bobcat. "I'm going to help. Us both." The blade was sharp, but the chains were thick. Caroline sawed methodically, her arms burning with effort. Each scrape of metal seemed deafening in the cave's silence. The bobcat watched her with gleaming eyes, somehow sensing her intent. Minutes stretched like hours. Caroline's wrists bled where the chains bit into them, but she kept working. Finally, with a soft snap, one link gave way. She carefully extracted herself, then turned toward the mother bobcat. "Your baby needs you," Caroline murmured, inching closer. The animal tensed, but didn't strike. With trembling hands, Caroline attacked the bobcat's chains. The animal remained eerily still, as if understanding this was their chance. The cave entrance scraped open, light spilled in as Delaney returned, probably expecting to find her already dead. His smug expression froze when he saw Caroline standing free, the mother bobcat beside her with broken chains dragging. "That's impossible," he snarled, reaching for his gun. The mother bobcat launched forward with explosive speed. Delaney screamed. As teeth and claws found their mark, his shot went wild, the bullet sparking off stone. Caroline tackled him, sending the weapon skittering away. They grappled on the cave floor. Delaney was stronger, but Caroline had survival coursing through her veins. She heard Jake's voice shouting from above, accompanied by multiple footsteps. Her backup had arrived. "It's over, Delaney," she panted, pinning him down. The mother bobcat had already bounded away, likely seeking her kitten. "The FBI has your files. Every crooked deal, every laundered dollar." Jake burst in with 2 federal agents, weapons drawn. "Carolyn," he called. "You okay?" She nodded, watching as they cuffed Delaney. His expensive jacket was torn, his careful facade shattered. "You're nothing," he spat at her. "Just a backwoods deputy who got lucky." Caroline stood straighter. "No, I'm the one who listened when others looked away, and that makes all the difference." Outside, dawn painted the mountains gold. Federal vehicles surrounded the lodge as agents led away Delaney's men in handcuffs. Caroline saw the mother bobcat reunite with her kitten near the tree line, both disappearing into the forest where they belonged. Jake approached, limping but proud. "You did it, Caroline. The whole operation's exposed. They found enough evidence to put Delaney away for decades." The kitten appeared one last time at the forest's edge, looking back at Caroline. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't from fear or pain. They were tears of recognition, of knowing that sometimes the smallest cry for help could awaken the greatest courage, that doing what was right, even when it seemed impossible, could change everything. "You know," Jake said softly, "that kitten chose well when it chose you." Caroline smiled, wiping her eyes. The sun climbed higher, warming her face. She had started this journey feeling overlooked and powerless. Now she stood tall, knowing her true worth had nothing to do with rank or recognition. It came from having the courage to listen, to act, and to fight for what was right, no matter how dark the Night became dot. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.